and that's fine. So we want these to be cooked about 95% of the way. So when it comes time for dinner, I can just pull them out of wherever I've stashed them, throw them in a hot pan with a little bit of butter, pinch of salt, grind of pepper, bing, bang, boom. As soon as they're hot, they're done. And you can do this with large quantities and stash it in the fridge for 2 or 3 days if you happen to want the same vegetable as a side dish for a few days. And in this case, it's a pretty neutral poaching liquid. So if you wanted to do, like, you could throw that in a pan with some butter, some ginger, and some chili, and some garlic, and it would be delicious. You could throw it with some onion. You could throw it in there with some toasted cumin and some sumac, and it would be delicious. You could throw it in a pan with some bourbon and brown sugar, and it would be delicious. And you would never think that they started out in the same way. At least not really. Now, as for me, I'm not sure what I'm going to do with these. It might just end up being butter, salt, and pepper, because stroganoff in particular is pretty robust in terms of flavor. There's a lot going on with beef stroganoff, and I don't necessarily, and any vegetable that I pair it with is going to be kind of overmatched. Yes, yes, you do. It's my this is my default tea mug. I don't drink from anything else. Oh yeah, did you Husky, did our birthday card show up? If not, go check your mail. Let's see. So we've got our carrots on our way to poaching. The brown sugar that's in here, the piloncillo, is almost fully dissolved, which is fine. It didn't have to be fully dissolved when we first got started, but now it should be closer. Wonderful. All right. So now we have stuff for tomorrow, stuff for today, stuff for tonight. Now, what else can we do while we're at it? Let's consider the chicken korma for a second. What do we want to do with alongside that? So it's got some pretty aggressive flavor. It's got a passable amount of vegetable matter. It's got meat, it's got dairy, it's got spice, but it doesn't have much in the way of vegetable matter. So, and I don't have a whole heck of a lot of just general veggies on hand. Doran. Right. I have just the thing, as a matter of fact. So, there is, oh, excuse me. There is a dish called Doran, which is most commonly and most well known for being made with the equivalent of like green beans, or a lot of times it would be more like Chinese long beans. You cut them into small pieces, like maybe 1 centimeter or length, and then they are cooked. It's basically a dry curry. You get its spices, its chili, its garlic, sometimes it's garlic, and it's coconut. So it's a savory green bean and coconut dish, but I found it's much easier to make year-round if you use frozen peas, because not only does that save you a boatload of knife work, but it also saves you the trouble of finding fresh beans year-round, which can be a bit of a hassle sometimes. So that's one of those cool things that you don't. It's a good way to save yourself a little bit of trouble without sacrificing quality, because fresh versus frozen, in terms of something like that, like Most frozen products, individual stuff like peas or corn, those are all the product of what you call bumper crops. Now I've mentioned this before, but it's ditto for tomatoes in particular. Um, at the end of the growing season, the the stuff that's about to ripen that the markets know they can't sell, anything over their projected sales, they will send for processing to be IQF, individually quick frozen, where they are sprayed down with a basically a frozen brine to be flash frozen and then bagged and stashed. So, and they are done at the pretty much the peak of their ripeness and flavor. So it's not a super. There isn't much in the way of loss of quality, if any, really. So I'll take frozen peas over fresh peas 9 times out of 10, especially if I have to process them myself. Because if you ever had to shell peas or like Romano beans or favas or something like that, you don't want to. Like, I don't know how stuff like that ever managed to end up as a popular component of modern agriculture because it is such a pain in the ass. Related, if somebody asks for favas, IQF edamame are pretty much indistinguishable, but you didn't hear that from me. So, which reminds me, I also have to start doing some menu planning and start making my shopping lists because I have a very large catering event to do at the end of the month down in San Mateo. Somebody contacted me through for a baby shower at a because I'm the default catering guy for a small event venue down in San Mateo, even though I moved a long way off. I haven't gotten things basically since the pandemic began back in 2020, and this will be the first one since then. But they want it's a fairly small venue, and they've got it booked to capacity, and they want a lot of food. So plus their menu is actually pretty comprehensive as far as that goes. They wanted an Asian-esque menu. Actually, I should dig it up in just a second. I suppose I can share it with you. There we go. Found it. So what they want from me is so this is a list of stuff from my not from my catering menu per se, but this is variations on a theme, right? So they want my sesame and hoisin glazed salmon with the ginger and roasted pepper relish. They want a lot of that. They want some Japanese style vegetable curry. They wanted a vegetarian. They wanted another vegetarian dish, so I recommended a mushroom mapo tofu. So I don't know which. I've made that on stream a time. I make mapo tofu somewhat regularly, or at least I used to on stream because I love the stuff. But for those that do not, for those of the vegetarian persuasion, there tends to be meat in it normally. But if you grind up a whole bunch of mushrooms, you basically make duxelle. It works out just fine as a substitute. And then you have I mean, it's more expensive technically because most mushrooms by the pound are actually more expensive than the meat I would be using, and that's concerning. And also, you lose a whole heck of a lot more water, so you're going to end up with substantially less bulk. So it's like you've got the hoisin salmon, the veggie curry, the mapo tofu. They want a whole bunch of garlic sesame greens, and then they want my skewers. They want my chicken cur my wait was it Oh yeah, my Thai jungle curry chicken skewers. They wanted my Mongolian barbecue pork belly skewers, and they wanted some generic fruit skewers, which all of which are delicious. But they also wanted my one of the cool things. The reason that I thought of it just now is they want my edamame hummus ish, quote unquote hummus with crispy wonton chips. Which, that's a great way to get if you don't like chickpeas, or if you don't like the Egyptian version, which is made with fava beans. Holy crap, I don't recommend and trying that, especially if you have to shell the favas yourself. Which, when the garbanzo or the chickpea wandered its way into North Africa, everybody who was in charge of dealing with the favas was probably just like, oh, thank you. What a relief. Because processing garbanzos is way the hell easier than processing favas, just as a general rule. But anyway, it is a lot of skewers, but it's about 30 people. So I suppose I could take a moment and we can talk about my catering methodology here. So the big stuff, I tend to offer in half pans versus full pans. Like, I have your standard chafing dishes. For those of you that are familiar, it's the stuff that you see on like hotel breakfast buffets. Those things with the sterno. I have a couple of those. That's the stuff. So you can put either one big tray or two small ones. Usually it'll be these. Like, these are disposable versions of those same trays. Same size, same depth, same can hold the same amount. So I tend to offer in half pan or full pan. And usually if I do full pan, it's just going to be two half pans, because these are much easier to manage and to store. And if you have one that's really big and full of really heavy stuff, it's much more likely to bend, to tear, or to just fall, even if you happen to support the bottom. And always support the bottom. So basically they're going to get at one of these full of all of the large stuff that I mentioned, like the salmon or the curry and the mapo tofu. And then the skewers, I sell those by the piece, right? With a guaranteed minimum number of whichever item. Which is a lot of times that's how catering works. If you have to, you either sell it by either by the pound, by the tray, like those, or by the piece. Which, for the smaller stuff, like the hors d'oeuvres, or skewers, or all of the little stuff that the munchies. Now, these. In this case, like for example, I offer the price per skewer, and then I require a minimum of 10 skewers per item, that's just me covering my bets, making sure that somebody's not going to order like two skewers of everything, which means I have to buy enough product that I don't actually make any money on the deal. Right? It's like if they order 10, I can budget accordingly and make an appropriate, give a reasonable price and enough that I can make a little bit of a profit on. Which is the hard part most of the time, because frankly, prices of almost everything, even at industry, even not at retail, even at like industry or wholesale, they are through the damn roof. It is mildly ridiculous how much people are spending on just general like staples nowadays. It's a little bit crazy. Since I just moved, the local Safeway, I notice, is actually, it's designed for a different community. Like the produce section is much smaller. the prepared food section is much larger, and the portions of what's available are much smaller. Like you're not going to be able to get like the prepackaged pound of cheese, like sliced cheese. You're going to be able to get the half pound, or for example, you're not going to ditto for the. You're not going to get the pound of prepackaged deli ham. You're going to get like the 6 or 7 ounce ones. And so, and there's a whole heck of a lot more like prefab stuff in the meat cases, in the deli cases, in the frozen aisles. It's a very interesting contrast, and it's a little worrisome. Right, so where was I? All right, we're starting. Our corbouillon has started to. Wait, what the heck did I just do? Did I just do something by accident? Crap. Well, thank you for the follow. Oh, dearie me. Well, thanks. Welcome, welcome. Husky eyes on, would you? Oh, hello, Albert. Welcome, welcome. What brought you here? I don't often get surprise followers, although that leads me to believe that I may be wandering on the front page of Twitch in the food and drink category, because sometimes they will just randomly scroll through people who are actively streaming in various categories, and I have been known to show up there from time to time. They try and often fail to promote smaller streamers, but you know, sometimes they try, and that's a start. Yeah. Pardon me for just a moment while I clean some stuff up. I gotta dry off my cutting board. I gotta dry off my countertop because I have done a whole lot of washing up because there has been a whole lot of raw protein over here, which requires some fairly robust cleaning. Yeah, da 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 da. Now I need to dry. I need to let it dry. Really, all the raw chicken. Now there is not so much raw chicken, but what on earth are you talking about over there? I am not entirely sure, but while I do aim to be fairly interactive with my stream audience, I do try to keep things leaning towards the general theme. As a chef and a culinary educator, there we are. Okay, now that the counter is dry, I can get away with putting my cutting board back on it. Pain in the neck that it is. Ugh. Now I do have to put something down as both an insulator and as an anchor. That way, the cutting board is much less likely to move, right? So if you have something that is not necessarily wet, but at least damp underneath to serve as an anchor for your cutting boards, you're much less likely for them to slide, much less likely for them to be troublesome along the way. All right, so real quick, now that we've these have been cooking for long enough that I think they're close to done, if not done. I'm just going to take something and I'm going to stab it. I'm going to stab one of them. Let's see how done they are. They are not done, but they are close. Maybe 2 or 3 more minutes at a gentle simmer, and they should be just fine. Like, they're not done, but they're close enough that I'm not going to worry about it too much. In the meantime, though, I'm going to prepare the quench. I'm going to get some ice and make a little ice bath. That way, I can stop the cooking process where I want it to stop, as opposed to, you know, somewhere that I don't. So ideally, I wanted to poach the carrots to a certain degree of doneness and then stop the cooking process there until it's time for dinner, where I can just very quickly finish that last little bit and then serve them. Oh, real quick, I'm just going to reload my ice cube tray, get that back in the freezer. So, you don't need much necessarily, because also I'm not cooking a whole heck of a lot of carrots, but this isn't going to hurt anything. I got 4 ice cubes and maybe a cup and a half of water in here. That's going to be plenty to, once I drain these carrots, I'm just going to throw them in that ice bath for a minute or two, and that will do the trick. Let's see, what's left? We got 5 minutes left on my timer for the chicken korma. Wait, what the? Oh my goodness, what? Oh goodness. Alright, so these are just about ready. Even if they aren't fully cooked, that's fine. So I can pull this, I can safely and comfortably pull this now. Because these have been going for a good 10 or 15 minutes. So you just throw them over here, you drain them, and then you throw them into the ice bath so that they can stop cooking. Because otherwise, they are going to what we call carry over. Which means, in this case, which is pretty much self-explanatory, but like, it's the same reason that you pull a piece of meat out of the oven before it's done, because the inside is still hot and it's going to continue cooking even though it's not in the oven anymore, right? And that's honestly a fairly important thing to keep in mind when you're dealing with, particularly with expensive cuts of meat. You do not want to overcook a fancy cut of meat. So you pull it out early, you let it relax, you give it an opportunity for the juices to redistribute, because a little bit of culinary biochem here. When you cook animal protein, the muscle fibers tense up, and that tends to concentrate the available liquid in the piece of meat closer to the center. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but once the cooking process stops, those muscle fibers need to relax enough that that liquid redistributes evenly throughout the muscle fibers again, which is why they always say, let your meat rest before you cut it, because if you don't, you're going to do all the juices that had concentrated are just going to be like, oh wait, it's go time, bleh, and they're going to go everywhere. That's why you can always tell when somebody didn't let their meat rest long enough when they slice it, because it's messy. And it ends up potentially being quite dry, which is always bad. The last thing you want to have is a dry, tough piece of meat. Blech. I mean, unless you deliberately make it that way as a preservation method. There are a few dishes where that is the case. There's one in Indonesia. There's one called rendang, where you basically you just cook your meat in spices over and over and over again until it is dry, bordering on crunchy, and, and it is braised, and then it is cooked until um, so that the not only does the cooking do help as a preservation, the dehydration helps as a preservation, and also the spice crust helps as another preservation. So there's a lot of there are a lot of ways that you can kind of stack on top of one another to ensure things are longer, sure things last longer and are better preserved. And in a place like in Southeast Asia, meat goes bad real fast because the climate is not conducive to room temperature meat, let's say. So when you do your butchering, you got a lot of work to do. You have to go from start to finish all at once. There's not going to be, it's like you're going to see salting, you're going to see drying, you're going to see smoking, you're going to see pickling, you're going to see all sorts of preservation methods. You're going to see a whole lot of, I'm not sure off the top of my head what kind of like force meat preparations they have in some regions of Southeast Asia. Like, I don't know how big Southeast Asia tends to be on sausage and sausage derivatives. Um, just because I feel like uh, it's a lot of work for what you get. And that might be something I should dig into later. Um, Force meats in Southeast Asia, because I never actually dug into that too terribly much, because most of the time when it comes to cooking the pieces of meat that you would normally end up using in things like sausage or grinding up for force meat, basically it's just braising or stewing instead. So, which takes a whole lot less work. It's like, oh, you could take this gnarly piece of meat, you could grind it up, you could clean out an intestine, and you could stuff it in there, and then you could twist it and you could hang it, and you could smoke it, or you could just take the whole thing, throw it in a pot of water, and bring it to a simmer and wait for half a day, and not even pay any attention to it as long as you don't let the fire go out. Gosh, I wonder which one I would rather do. Like it's all right. So my timer just went off about the korma. So let's take a look. Let's see how she fares. Ooh, that is bubbly and bobbly. There's a fair bit more liquid in there that I want. So, okay. Crash. Also, that's very, very hot. Need to be very careful. I'm going to pop the lid off this. Whoosh. Oh, that smells good. That smells really good. I'm going to tuck the lid over here on top of my toaster oven because it's about a bazillion degrees. And give this a little jostle. Let's see what it looks like. Okay, so as you can see, it doesn't look like much. It looks pretty similar, actually, to the beef stroganoff that we made yesterday. There we go. It's a little bit more on the yellow side, but that's okay. That's because that's kind of what it was supposed to be. Now, as you can see, there's no obvious curdling. So the yogurt that we used in the chicken marinade came up to temperature at a rate that resulted in it staying cohesive. It did not crumble, it did not curdle, it did not end up looking gnarly. So we had to worry about that twice, both with the stroganoff and the sour cream, and also here in the korma with the yogurt. So now you know how to do this with two popular marinade ingredients. Now I'm just going to give this a quick stir. Now you can probably see up here that there is some fat that's rendered out and is sitting on top. That's fine. These were chicken thighs. They were not so they could be potentially very fatty, but I trimmed off most of the fat and I got rid of the skin. So we don't really have to worry about it being a very fatty finished product. That's actually one thing that doesn't get a lot of attention in the food world in general. What a lot of people don't realize that braises, stews, and slow-cooked dishes tend to be quite low in fat because they do use tougher, often fattier cuts of meat, but in the time that is spent to cook those cuts and make sure that they are tender and delicious, that fat pretty much all renders out. Like as you can see on there is a cap of oil rendered chicken fat on the top of this right now. That's not a bad thing. And as this cools, the fat will solidify, and I could just pick it off and throw it away if I want to, which is kind of awesome. Let's be honest here. So it's, and you do the same thing when you're making things like stocks. There's going to be some residual fat on like your bones or your skin or your whatever, or your scraps or whatever else. It's going to render off as the stock cooks. It's going to sit on the top, and once it cools, you can just pick it up and throw it away. And presto, you have managed to remove all of the fat from your existing dish. At least all of the renderable fat. There is inevitably going to be some chunks of fat just hanging around, chunks of the tough bits that you don't necessarily want to eat. And as you finish processing your meat, you can just pull those off. Like for those of you that have ever made, like for example, pulled pork, like barbecued pork shoulder, something like that, there's always going to be some gnarly bits in your pork shoulder that they look fatty, they look tough, and you're just going to yank that out and throw it away because nobody's going to want to eat it. And so your end result is going to be both prettier and lower fat for doing so. Now hang on one second, let me just have a quick taste. This might be a little under-seasoned. I suspect it is. Ooh, that's nice. It is under-salted, it's not necessarily under-spiced. But what I'm going to do, actually, is I'm going to throw it back into the oven for another 15 to 20 minutes. Actually, no, never mind. No, I'm not. I'm going to turn on the heat on the stovetop, and I'm just going to kind of boil it away for maybe 15 minutes to reduce the liquid volume. Because right now, there's a lot of liquid in there, and that means there's going to be a lot of sauce, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but right now there's too much, and I want to make sure that there is exactly enough. So while we boil this down, what this is going to do is multiple things. For one, it's going to remove water. So, and ideally, water doesn't have a flavor. So removing some of the volume of water will ensure that everything that's left is a more concentrated flavor, right? So it's going to be, as we reduce this, it's going to get saltier, it's going to get spicier, and it's going to get more, and it's going to get richer. All of which are good things for a dish like this, because this is the kind of thing that you don't want to eat too terribly much of, because you're going to end up with the itis, something fierce. Oh, excuse me. Ow. Pardon. I don't know what happened there. Sorry. Blah. Okay, don't die. Blah. Blah. Okay. So that's just going to get bubbly and bobbly for a little while. That's not actually a problem, because even though It's a little bit more violent in terms of agitation. There's nothing in there that's going to just out and out disintegrate, so it's pretty much okay. Um, I'm gonna take our carrots now that they have been blanched, cooled, and I'm just gonna stick them in a container and stick them in the fridge till dinner time because they are, 95% cooked. And all I need to do now is heat them up again and serve them for supper. And that supper is going to be very, very tasty. Part of me wants to have some of the stroganoff now, but I really, really shouldn't, because I don't want to eat. Because I don't want to eat it necessarily twice in one day, even if I would normally not have a problem with it. Because it's like, oh, I'm going to eat all of. If I start eating it, I might just not stop eating it, and then there will not be enough left for dinner. Not that that's going to be a problem. I did make maybe 2.5 pounds of. There were probably 2 pounds and change worth of meat when I started, plus a pound of mushrooms and a pound of onion, or thereabouts. So there's a lot of stuff in there, and that's not factoring in the liquid, the braising liquid itself, and whatever I serve it with, whether it be rice, noodles, mashed potatoes, something like that. That's another good thing. Both of these dishes are ideally served with some kind of starch, something to soak up a sauce. Whether a lot of times you'll see, if it's not going to be like rice, whether it's basmati or jasmine or whatever, you might see some sorts of flatbread. You might see paratha. You might see naan. You might see puri. You might see oh gosh, what's that other one? Brain fart. There's a laundry list of Indo-Pakistani flatbreads, and I can't remember them all. Don't kick me, Syra. I promise. I tried. I have a couple of my coworkers in the cooking school that I used to work in before the pandemic shut it down grew up in India, and so I paid a lot of it. I looked over their shoulder a lot. They always had cool stuff to share with me. We basically just sort of swapped stuff because they knew obviously a heck of a lot more about southern coastal Indian food than I did, and I pretty much had them on all the rest of Asia and Southeast Asia. So there was a lot of shop talk back and forth. And we are all better cooks today because we spent the time to chit chat. Now, as this reduces, it's going to intensify. It's also going to thicken, both of which are things that I want to happen. However, I don't think it's going to thicken enough. So once the sauce is reduced to a flavor and intensity that I believe is suitable, I am instead going to add a little bit of starch to thicken it. I'm probably going to end up using either cornstarch or tapioca starch or maybe potato starch, katakuriko. But you just basically make a little bit of a slurry. You take some starch, you swirl in a little bit of ice cold water, and then you stir it into this, and then it immediately expands and serves as a thickening agent. Now, the reason that I would use something like cornstarch versus is both regionally and culturally appropriate, as opposed to, like, if I were doing something like the stroganoff, I might use a roux, which is a combination of fat and flour that has been cooked a little bit to just kind of cook out the raw flour taste, and then you stir that into a liquid that you want thickened. The differences being a roux takes a lot longer for the thickening to happen. So you basically have to add it and then wait. Whereas something like a cornstarch slurry will happen, the thickening process will happen almost immediately. Same goes for like tapioca starch or potato starch. If you're going to use slurries of those to thicken something, it's going to thicken up almost immediately. it'll be really obvious. So if you're in a hurry, cornstarch slurries are the way to go. Hold on. That's really nice. It's actually quite spicy. Well, in terms of not only like spice, but also capsaicin spice. That single serrano that I threw in there is pretty aggressive. I'm gonna add a little bit of salt, not much, just a little pinch. And I'm gonna swap this back again. There we go. Now then, where was I? So we are reducing our korma braising liquid to be a little bit more intense. We are, and also to allow it to thicken a little bit, we are currently sitting on, we got our par cooked carrots, we got our, in our courbouillon, those are done, those are iced and fridged, which is great. And that's basically the lot of it. I don't really have anything else off the top of my head that we can work through today because the rest of it's going to be kind of boring. Like I'm going to make some rice. I'm going to boil some water and cook some egg noodles, big hairy deal, right? Most of this is actually, that's one of the things about being a food and drink streamer on Twitch. There's only so far stage presence and useful information can go. There's got to be enough visual interest to keep people watching. Not always, because plenty of people I know who watch food and drink streamers don't actually watch them. They just listen in. Like they're going to have it streaming on their phones in the car in lieu of a podcast while they're driving, or they're going to be listening to it at work while they're, behind their desk doing whatever they normally do. Which that's perfectly acceptable to me. A viewer's a viewer as far as Twitch is concerned. And honestly, ditto for me. I do like it when people speak up more. That way, in the chat. But honestly, that's not a super big deal. Most of the time, the chat is fairly quiet unless people have specific questions, or I get surprise new viewers, or I get a raid, or I get a troll, something like that, Now, let me have a gander. I have a notion as to what do we got here? Aha! All right. Pardon me just a second. I needed to adjust an OBS setting real quick, or at least I would like to do that. Grumble, grumble. There we go. Okay, sorry. I accidentally fat fingered a couple of keys earlier and it kind of messed up my stream settings, which not necessarily at least it didn't mess them up for you. It messed them up for me a little bit, and that's kind of a bother, but not necessarily a bad thing. Just something that I had to correct. What grumble, grumble? Why you grumble, grumble? No grumble. What's the matter? Red Sky Blue Jay. I know that handle. How are you? What is up? Hopefully all is well with you. Oh gosh, bubbly, bubbly, bubbly. So over here, I can tell by the state of the bubbles that the braising liquid is starting to thicken, right? Like, it's kind of like the difference between seeing boiling water versus boiling cream, for example. There's a somewhat subtle visual cue that you can use to determine the relative thickness of viscosity of a liquid that you're cooking with. Now, it's getting there. It's not where I want it yet, but we're getting there. It'll show up eventually. Part of me wants to add more spices to this because it feels a little bit more toned down, but as I reduce the braising liquid, I think it'll all work out all right. It's like you can get the coconut flavor, obviously, because that's about 2/3 of the liquid and about a quarter cup of actual coconut in there. So the flavor there is pretty aggressive. The yogurt has kind of wandered its way to the background, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I might actually temper in a little bit more yogurt later once this has had a chance to cool off, because yogurt has a very mild, somewhat subtle acidity to it, and if you can't get, if you know you have enough salt, but it still doesn't taste the way you want it, try adding something acidic, whether it's citrus, tamarind, tomato, vinegar, or something like yogurt or sour cream, something along those lines. Just a little hint of acidity can make all the difference. Like it tends to brighten flavors. It tends to tune things up with just a little bit more intensity that will give you the result that you want. Or I could just cheat and put in about a half a teaspoon of rice vinegar. Not even that much. Like a quart, like literally maybe 1 cc worth of rice vinegar is probably enough. So I'm just going to swirl that in, and that little itty bitty hint of acidity is going to result of, yep, still an acid, just an itty bitty bit. Ha. Yeah, immediately the flavor is intensified. I didn't even add, I added hardly any. Like you saw me. I didn't even fill the vinegar cap. I added about 1 milliliter, or maybe 2 milliliters worth of vinegar, and that was all you need. Because just that little bit of acidity is enough to wake everything up and just kind of smack it. It's like, hey, you have a thing that you want to do, you can do a little better. Now that also works. The most obvious example of that is actually hot sauce. Because, like, for example, what's Tabasco? It's basically just ground up chilies and vinegar. Or what's sriracha? It's chilies, garlic, and vinegar. Why? Because vinegar has that amplification effect. You lower the pH, you intensify the effect of the flavors in your mouth, on your tongue. And in the case of hot sauce, it has the side benefit of also functioning as a preservative. That's really good. I'm really happy now. It's fun. Like, I don't make a whole lot of Indian food. I haven't made a whole lot this last month or two, because I spent most of last month moving, and the kitchen was packed up. Everything that's in this kitchen, now that I've finished moving, none of it was in the old place, except for that red pot. Because everything that I normally use was a little beat up, and so it wouldn't work on their stovetop, because I just moved out of a place with an induction stovetop. So it was all of my pots and pans that spent time in real kitchens were a little bit beat, a little bit bent, a little bit warped, and so completely useless for an induction environment. Oh yes. This makes me very happy. All right, now we're starting to get towards that sort of nappe consistency, which is it's a French term, but it's a level of thickness. It is the sauce consistency. Most people would know that when they saw it. It's the equivalent, like, chocolate sauce, for example. That's a pretty good example. Just your generic like chocolate syrup. That's a little bit thicker because it's refrigerated, but at room temperature, that's sauce, right? Or maybe maple syrup, fresh out of the fridge. That's sauce consistency, more or less. It's a little thick, but if you dunk a spoon in it, it's gonna stay. It's gonna coat the spoon. It's not just going to wash off like water would, right? So that's a good comparison for those of you that may or may not be familiar or don't care about learning French. Oh, that looks really good. I am, in fact, going to add a little bit of a starch slurry to that just to tighten it up a little bit more. Not much. I'm probably going to add about a tablespoon of cornstarch and a matching amount of water. Oh, that's too much. Get back in there. There we go. Because a little goes a really long way with cornstarch in a way that it doesn't with a roux necessarily. Now, using a slurry it takes a little bit of practice. So you have to use, ideally you will use very cold water in a quantity approximately double whatever amount of cornstarch you're adding. You want your water to be as cold as possible, but in a pinch, room temperature will have to suffice, Sometimes you can't get what you want. But the other thing is that you don't want your food, whatever your liquid you're trying to thicken, to be at a rolling boil. You do not want it to be boiling, because if it's too hot, the starch will not only diffuse, but it will just, it will break. It will try and thicken, and it will fail. Like you will, basically the heat will be high enough that the starch molecules will the very, very fine starch molecules in cornstarch will, it's the equivalent of like frying gnocchi, for those of you that are familiar. The external surface of the starch molecules will caramelize on the, and so they will not expand. All right, that should be enough. Yeah, there we go. All right, now I didn't even add all of what I had intended to, because I could tell immediately that I had how much it had thickened. And that looks delicious. It looks kind of, okay, so full disclosure, it does look kind of boring when you're staring at it. It's just a pile of beige / taupe colored stew, more or less. But as soon as you dip your spoon in and have a taste, you'll be like, oh, never mind. This is ridiculously good. Haha. And so I don't need the rest of my slurry. I'm just going to dump that out. I'm going to dilute it, and I'm going to dump it down the sink. And yes, I do have to dilute it a little bit, because cornstarch is weird in that it is the way it interacts with water in particular. It's kind of it gets into non-Newtonian fluid dynamics, and I don't want to spend a lot of time going into that. Yes, exactly. It does look boring, but there's a lot of really, really good food that looks that color. That's that color. Like a really good bowl of New England clam chowder. I'm okay with that. It looks kind of sad, but it's delicious. This looks a little sad, but it's delicious. There's a classical French dish that's this color. It's blanquette de veau. It's a veal stew. It's incredibly delicious. And honestly, like, you know what else is that color or pretty darn close? My stroganoff. It's beige, verging on, it's pasty pale. It doesn't look interesting, but it is rich, robust, full of flavor, and incredibly delicious. So the trick with stuff like this is to find ways to serve it that make it look interesting. Like, ideally, that chili pepper that I threw in there would not have kind of fallen apart the way it did. I probably should have slid it once instead of twice. Oh well. But we got all the heat out of it. We got all the intensity out of it. Like the cinnamon sticks are still kicking around in there somewhere. And honestly, this is going to look fantastic. So when you serve something like this, you got to hit it with maybe I would throw some toasted coconut on top. I would throw some cilantro leaves on top. I would throw some thinly sliced scallions on top. I might slice some. I might slice up some chilies and throw some like red chili rings on top, just to add a little bit of visual contrast and try and punch up the look a little bit. But ultimately, it doesn't. It's going to be delicious either way. So making it look more delicious is not going to change the fact that it is delicious, even if people who are in the placebo group believe otherwise. I'm going to enjoy the bejesus out of this tomorrow. Also, that's another thing that I have that I should go into a little bit. The reason that I made the stroganoff yesterday for today was not just so that you could see both steps of the process, the start and the finish, but it was, yeah, true. That's very true. But what I was about to say is the reason that I did the stroganoff yesterday and I'm serving it for dinner tonight is so that the flavors have a chance to mingle. They have a chance to develop over time. The flavors that are in there are going to continue to develop, even overnight in the fridge, and they are going to be more well-rounded, more subtly integrated over the course of a day or so than they would be that if you just pulled it straight out of the oven, finished it, and served it. Right? That's for the same reason that people will say if you're making like chocolate chip cookie dough, make your dough and then stick it in the fridge. Bake it off the next day. That one day of aging will create a very noticeable difference in quality and character of your dough. Like, it's going to be different, it's going to be better, and it's going to be obvious. At least if you made good cookies to start with. But yeah, it's the same, like you see it a lot you see it most often in braises, stews, and slow cooked items, which is why I'm doing it this way. It's like something that I can make if I can make it one day and serve it the next day or the day after that, the flavor will be markedly superior to when I first finished it. It's not to say it's bad now. It just means it's going to be different and a little bit more complex, a little bit more robust, a little bit more interesting the next day. So you see that, like, if you go out for like Thai food and you get like a masamam curry or something like that, it's going to be different the next day if you take home leftovers and then heat them up out of the fridge the following day. It's going to be because the flavors, the many flavors, the herbs, the spices, the acids, the herbs, they will have had time to mesh and integrate more thoroughly. And it kind of smooths out any rough edges that the dish might have had before, which is always very helpful, honestly. Like, I'm a very big fan of cook something today and eat it tomorrow just so that can happen. It doesn't matter what most of the time, unless we're talking like short order cooking. Like a quiche is not going to be measurably better the next day because it's eggs, or like fast stuff that's designed to be cooked fast. A cheeseburger is not going to be better tomorrow than it is today, for obvious reasons. partially because it's a force meat, and partially because it's going to require a second cooking, which is going to turn it from perfect to overdone and dry. But for stuff for stuff like this, braises, stews, slow cooks, it works really, really well. And also, it saves you a lot of time because you can cook this once and then eat it for 3 days, and you don't have to worry about